Hello, my name is Jesse Burbank, and I'm a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending this evening's program. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, and plan an SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoy this evening's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. Your attendance and feedback help shape future programming. To view past programs, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. A video of tonight's presentation will be available on our website soon. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we'll have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. Finally, if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers here in the hall, and they can assist. And now, please welcome Associate Director of the Dole Institute, Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Good evening, and thank you, Jesse, very much. Can you hear me in the back? I see hands not flapping, but thank you very much. Again, I want to welcome you to the Dole Institute of Politics for it's going to be a very spirited evening, I'll just say that. We had a dinner a few minutes ago, and it was a lively discussion. And because of that, I do want to remind you of something that you heard just a few minutes ago. The Dole Institute of Politics always presents programs, and we have questions and answers afterwards. But we also ask that people are civil and that they're courteous. Those are important. When we talk about who's polarized and who's not, part of it is always being courteous. But we give you always that opportunity to ask your question, and you heard one, so that everybody will have that opportunity. But before I do our introductions this evening, I want to tell you how pleased we are to have so many of you here. Our subject matter tonight is something very important to the United States. It's important to lives, and it's something that everyone has an opinion about. But I want you to also know that we have study groups here, March 12th, 26th, and April the 2nd. If you've not tried one of our study groups, please look on the back of your program and think about attending if you have the time and the interest as well. Now to go back to our program, I will just say that this year the Dole Institute is launching the Innovation Series, which will focus on the crossroads between science, technology, and public policy. And our inaugural event is a two-part series on drones, and we would like you to join. We were pleased that you came to find out more about the technology, the uses of those drones, and not just for military, but as well as ethical questions about their deployment. Our sponsors this evening are KU School of Engineering, KU's Engineering Student Council, KU's Engineers Without Borders, and KU Robotics. For our speakers this evening, Scott Winship is Vice President of Advanced Air Warfare Development of Northrop Grumman Advanced Systems, a provider of manned and unmanned aircraft, space systems, and advanced technologies that play a role in U.S. national security. Mr. Winship is responsible for enterprise-wide strategic integration and pursuit of new opportunities. Previously, he was the Vice President and Program Manager for Northrop Grumman X-47B Navy Unmanned Combat Air System Carrier Demonstration Program. You can say all that in one breath. Winship was also the Program Director who led the Fire Scout Vertical Takeoff and Landing Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Program through first flight into production. Retired Admiral Timothy Beard joined Northrop Grumman Corporation in its Washington, D.C. office following a 34-year career as a naval aviator. He developed and implemented the Naval Space Integrated Product Team, which coordinated many of the company's business development and marketing efforts for the Navy and the Marine Corps. In 2005, he was named head of carrier integration for the Joint Unmanned Combat Air System. He subsequently became the Navy USAS Deputy Program Manager, and in 2010, he moved into the deputy position for advanced concepts. Both of our speakers this evening are very knowledgeable about their subject matter. We want to thank all of our sponsors this evening, certainly all of you for coming this evening, knowing that you have your opinion about drones and unmanned aircraft. You will have your opportunity to ask your questions. And with that, I will turn the program over to the director of the Dole Institute of Politics, Bill Lacey, and our two speakers, and please give them a warm welcome.
Gentlemen, thank you both so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate your being with us here at the Dole Institute on campus at the University of Kansas. Let's start with your personal background. Tell us all about your education, where you were raised, and kind of how you got in your career to where you are today. Now, I know both of you have long and distinguished careers, so don't talk for the entire program on this subject, but...
You go first. His is much more impressive than mine.
Well, I won't say that's necessarily true, because I have been associated with him for 13 years, and I'm lucky to have done that. I was raised in the Midwest in Ohio. I went to school at the U.S. Naval Academy, graduated, and decided to go into aviation, and went down to pilot training, got my wings, and did the normal progression of naval aviators through the career path. And was fortunate enough to fly in combat and get lots of good experience in a single-seat aircraft in Vietnam, and then I moved to a multi-place aircraft, the A-6, where I will tell you that I became aware of the fact that I was much better as a naval aviator, and my airplane was much more effective because there was somebody with me to share all that was involved in the cockpit. I think, having had a couple of questions earlier tonight, I think back on what I wished and would have done differently, or would have had done differently as a Navy combat pilot. And that's, I think, what keeps me going and involved in this particular area today, to try to make it more simple, or make it easier for us to be able to do the things that we're called upon, whether it's manned or unmanned. I commanded an A-6 squadron, and then was various Washington tours, was selected to command a ship. Commanded a ship called the USS San Diego, most improbably home ported in Norfolk, Virginia. Go figure. There's a sea story there that I'll tell you afterward if anybody wants to hear it, about the USS Winston Churchill. It was originally going to be home ported in Hawaii, and I got to fix it to put it in the Atlantic. I commanded an aircraft carrier, the one I always wanted to serve on, the USS John F. Kennedy. And in that job, I got to meet parts of the Kennedy family and got to know Carolyn Kennedy and her brother fairly well as a Navy guy could. Hosted them on board my carrier. And out of that tour was selected for admiral. And my first assignment out of a shore desk in Washington, D.C. after the carrier was at Marine Corps headquarters, where I became the loneliest sailor in all of the Marine Corps. It was perhaps one of the best tours I ever had. The Marines have continued to stand by me, and many of them are my friends today. I had 4 more flag jobs as an admiral. And then I retired out in 2000 after 34 years and was asked to join Northrop Grumman. I started with Northrop Grumman in Washington, D.C., and strictly a marketing and business development job. And a year after I'd been there, my boss came to me and said, "How'd you like to go to San Diego?" And it's the one place my wife had always said, if we could go somewhere, I'd like to go back to San Diego. We had one tour there, and so I gave him the answer right then and there, and we left practically the next day, and we've been in San Diego ever since. I linked up with Scott a year, maybe 6 months after I'd gotten to San Diego, because we had a problem trying to convince the Navy that they needed an unmanned helicopter on board their now lower manned ships to do surveillance that manned airplanes were unable to do. We had a helicopter that could fly for 7 or even 8 hours, whereas a manned helicopter is only good for 4. So you can cover much more territory, you can provide much more surveillance for the captain of that ship. And we pulled that through together and suffered through a couple of $0 budgets, got it reestablished, and that airplane is flying in the fleet today, and I'm quite proud that he and I had a major hand in it. It was he who envisioned the airplane that we're going to talk to you about tonight, the X-47. I came back and joined him and did most of the Navy marketing on that, thinking at the time, why didn't I get what unmanned could do for naval aviation when I had a uniform on? But I go through the same thing as I talk to admirals today, that they're trying to get the thought process forward of what can drones do to make warfighting better for our Navy? How can we better suit the warfighting forces that we are putting to sea on a regular basis? And so that's where I am today.
Okay.
I'm very pleased to be with you, and thank you all for coming out tonight.
Scott?
Yeah, thanks for having us. Drone is what I do when I'm talking about my resume. So, I was a Navy brat. Grew up in Annapolis and San Diego. Went to San Diego State, and flew a very undistinguished career with the Navy. They had so much of my act, they asked me to drive boats or sit in the back or do something else other than fly airplanes for them. After that, I went to work for a company called Lockheed, not Lockheed Martin at the time, it was Skunk Works up in Burbank, California. And after I sat in the tank for about 6 months getting my clearance, I was brought in to a little building over in Burbank and did my interview, my obligatory interview with a little guy by the name of Ben Rich, who, if you were a propulsion or thermo guy, you were done, you're through. If you were a business management type or anything else, he was going to grill you for a while. First day on the job there, they said, you know, have you seen the airplane? And I was expecting them to take me out to watch a, go look at a drawing or something. They walked me out in the hangar, and they were manufacturing the F-117. They were making F-117s in the dark, not in the dark in the hangar, but every 2 weeks or so, they'd put one in the back of a C-5 and take it out to a site to go test it. But that was the beginning of a relationship with those kinds of airplanes that I really relish. After the 117, I was asked to go over to do some work on what was then a black program, became ATF. It was the YF-22, the prototype for the F-22. Got to fly, or got to design and go to flight test with the flight engineers for the YF-22, an airplane that can do things in the air that airplanes should not be capable of doing. I've seen many test pilots pour out of an F-22 and go, we're never flying that test card again, ever. It's too hard on the back and the shoulders and the head. We won that contract. We won the YF-22 versus YF-23 when we went up against a company called Northrop, which, to my everlasting chagrin, we beat my future company. Went to Georgia to do the F-22 program. We moved down there because a guy by the name of Sam Nunn was down there. And we went to Georgia with the F-22, did my 4-year stint down in Georgia, and came back to California, back to Skunk Works. Did a brief stint on the X-33, which is a single-stage-to-orbit program that NASA never really got too seriously about. It was a program to replace the shuttle when they really didn't have the money to replace the shuttle, but they also didn't have the money to fly the shuttle. That became kind of a conundrum they couldn't fix. Got pulled over into a program called X-35. We were in competition with Boeing for the X-32 versus X-35. That was a program, Joint Strike Fighter. And I think when everybody else stepped back, I was standing there when they asked for somebody to run the STOVL, the short takeoff vertical landing version of that program. Having a propulsion and controls background helped a lot. When you're hovering, It is the perfect mix, the juxtaposition of propulsion and control. So I got to run that program, got an airplane in the air. I wish I had a video for you to watch that. It's an impressive thing to see 40,000 pounds hovering in the high desert. But it became the F-35 program. We won that program versus the passenger jet guys, Boeing. And they said, you're moving to Fort Worth. Having lived in Southern California most of my life, I assured them that was not going to happen. So I accepted an offer to go to Northrop and do a little unmanned helicopter. When Gary Irvin called me, and that's where I met Tim, he said, we've got an unmanned helicopter program. We need you to get it to first flight, need you to get it flying, you know, get it going. You're the program manager. I assured him I didn't know anything about helicopters. He said, that's okay, it's already been canceled. You got to get it started again. You can't make it any redder. It is already dead. We got it flying again. We got it going. We got the Navy back interested in it. The Marine Corps back interested in it. Got it reestablished and got going. And then got called to go do a joint unmanned combat air system, the JUCAS, that was originally an Air Force and Navy joint program. We quickly figured out, Tim was with me then, and we quickly figured out that the only thing unique about the demonstrator was it had not landed on a carrier. They hadn't done that yet for the Navy. Air Force has this habit of having these big long runways. It's pretty easy to land an unmanned system on a runway. It's been done many, many times. The Navy had not proven it was possible to do it on a carrier. And we turned that program, the joint program, into a Navy-specific program, which we're going to show you some highlights of today. The X-47, which we're going to talk about, is probably the state-of-the-art of unmanned systems, drones, if you will. And I'm very proud to have run that program. And now we're working on things that we can't talk as much about. But that's a short story long.
Let's make sure everybody's apprised of the basics. Gentlemen, give us a little bit of an explanation, the difference in a UAV and a drone, what a UAV is, and then a little bit on the history and development and use.
Go ahead.
In our parlance, a drone is a remote-controlled unmanned air vehicle. A UAV, an unmanned air vehicle, by itself is, the way we describe it, is totally autonomous. That means that the computers in it, and generally we work in levels of 3 at least, so that there's always comparison between 2 and 1 to be a decider. We work in such that the software is developed that the airplane can do nothing that has not already been programmed and then tested on the benches, and all the redundancy testing done on the benches for all those computers working at the same time. So the system we will refer to tonight is strictly an autonomous. No remote control. There is control via a data link that is not necessary to be 100%, but that control is done solely with a computer, a keyboard, a monitor, and a mouse. That's it. That's what we're going to talk about tonight, rather than training a pilot to fly the airplane itself. So that's in the way we refer to it, unmanned versus drones.
Okay.
The only thing I'd add is that to make it really simple, there is no stick and rudder in things that we refer to as UAVs, or the upper level UAVs. Drone has become a ubiquitous term. It bothers some people. It doesn't bother me. If you call something that's something, and call it that forevermore. But what we're talking about is the beginnings of unmanned operations. They started off with remote piloting, so the pilot is actually flying the airplane. He actually has control of the airplane. He does 30-degree rudder. He kicks left. He flares. The next generation of that, you tell it what to go do. You tell it to go land. It knows to go through the whole process of the approach, the turn, the tip over, the flare at the end, the touchdown, the run out. It knows to go do that. Previous generations, you have to actually fly it to the ground and park it and then tow it back. It doesn't, in what we're talking about tonight, it doesn't mean that much, but it gives you an idea. We are in the, the nascent stages of moving through this technology and moving into this technology.
Is it fair to say that the difference is that a UAV knows what to do but still takes the orders on exactly what to do from human guidance?
That's fair to say. I would add that the UAVs we're talking about tonight can execute an entire mission without talking to anybody at home. If that's what it wanted to go do, if it want to go, I want you to launch from, Kansas City International here, take a picture of Austin, Texas, and come home and land, that entire thing is done programmed and let it go do its thing. It will never call home and ask for permission if you don't tell it to. An RPV, a remote piloted vehicle, a drone, you have to actually fly it all the way, pay attention, watch your gauges. It's just like flying an airplane, but you're sitting in a seat that's much more comfortable than a metal ejection seat.
A corollary to that is that during the developmental stages of the X-47 for the Navy, the Naval Air System Command oversees the development of all airplanes that are going to fly on and off ships. And we were in the final stages of design, one of the final design reviews one day, and the question came up about doing off-optimum approaches to the ship. Now, manned airplanes landing aboard the ship, the airplane and the pilot has to be able to accommodate various circumstances that happen. Humans make mistakes. We don't always fly on the center line, we don't always fly on the optimum glide slope, and we don't always fly at the optimum airspeed or angle of attack. It's very seldom that we're able to repeat it to an absolute perfection. The UAV, the X-47, always did the same thing every time. It flew perfectly every time, and they wanted us to test the airplane in these non-optimum positions that they have to test manned aircraft. I remember the day that the question was asked, they wanted us to come in high and off-center so that you would have to reduce power, wing over, drop down, and get your reestablished on glide slope, and then reacquire. It's a test of pilot reaction, airplane capabilities, and so on and so forth. And Scott said, do you want us to program the airplane to do that? Because we have to program it to do those off-optimum things. The testing is so rigorous that the airplane just will not deviate. And when you see the video tonight, when we run the video, one of the students that's here, I spoke to her beforehand, watch where the nose wheel of the airplane lands up as it lands on the ship. It is absolutely centered on the center line of the carrier, which is optimum always. And every landing it's made to date has been right on the center line. Why do I mention that? Well, there's airplanes parked on the right-hand side of the ship, and if this thing drifts right on you, you have a real problem. And women that are flying these airplanes can recognize that drift, but our system has to be spot on all the time. And I offer that as a corollary because the testing is rigorous enough that we are pretty darn sure that it's going to act exactly the way it's been programmed.
Well, similar to if you want to test it in an off-optimum position, you have to teach it to do it wrong. You have to teach the airplane to do it wrong. It knows where center line is. It knows what its speed should be. It knows exactly what it's supposed to be doing. You have to tell it, okay, I know you know where you're supposed to be. Go right 50 feet, high 50 feet, and add 20 knots of airspeed. Now, if it had a brain, it would say, what am I doing? Why am I doing that again? So we'll get to it, I'm sure, in the later discussion, but it is just a computer. It has to be told exactly what to go do, right or wrong.
Okay, we're going to show the video, gentlemen, that you brought tonight. Do you want to kind of introduce it a little bit before we show it? And we'll show it on the big screen and right over here.
Okay.
Do you want to say anything ahead of that?
Let me do it or you do it?
Go ahead.
You're going to see a few seconds of a clip. You're going to see a few seconds of the X-47, which is the prototype that was developed to show it's possible to go land and move around a carrier. It's shot off, gear going up and down. It's doing the things an airplane does, but it goes to the turn, it picks its glide slope, it picks position, and lands and hits the middle wire and right on the paint. You watch all those brave souls standing right there.
And no one's in there.
No one's in there. Matter of fact, no one is flying that airplane. No one's telling it left rudder, right rudder, over. It is riding a beam, and it is integrating at 100 hertz that beam. You can display the hook position on a display of where the hook is relative to where it's supposed to be all the time. It's worth noting that that airplane goes and does a mission from a carrier. First, we have to prove it's possible to do it from a carrier. You'd be surprised how many people said, you can't do that. Only Gold Wings and can do that. Only guys with, real metal can go do those things. When in fact, talking to some of the engineers tonight at dinner, and the directorate here, you understand that the technology is not a leap. It is capable of doing that very easily. When that airplane comes back, one of the things that really, when it strikes pilots, and I said it at dinner, it strikes pilots when you tell them, it does that, comes and hits center line. It also won't care how stormy it is out, how much the ship is rocking. It can be a force 5 seas. It can be really dark out. It doesn't care. And that capability, if you ever come back and landed at night, I've done it innumerable times less than Tim, it is a really hard, high-gain task. And that airplane is doing it at night all the time. It doesn't see any of that. It just rides a wave, just does what it's told.
Okay, talk a little bit about, gentlemen, about how UAVs perform and operate versus a human-piloted plane.
As I told the dinner audience earlier, and I will repeat myself, there's only a couple or a handful of reasons for building unmanned air vehicles to assist in military or in civilian form. They can do things that humans cannot. They can stay longer, they may be able to fly higher, they may be able to go into threat areas where we would not send a human otherwise. It has to be a quantifiable gain, leap above man technology, or it really doesn't make any sense in doing these. The helicopter we were talking about can fly about double what 2 helicopter pilots can off a ship at sea. Well, that means we double the area that we can surveil, or we revisit targets twice as many times. That's a leap forward. That's providing the captain or that airplane or that group or that ship or that group with additional intelligence or surveillance of the battle space or the sea around it. The same thing goes for long-range surveillance aircraft. We build one that flies at 60,000 feet and flies for 30-plus hours. We can get it places and take imagery of areas that we otherwise could not do with a manned aircraft and allow it to stay there. I used the analogy earlier tonight. During the first Gulf War, we had a heck of a time finding Scuds, and I'm not sure we ever got one on the ground because they would bring them out of the hiding places, and when no one was around, and then they'd shoot and they'd run back in. We'd never found them. We never got one of them. We saw the missiles, but that didn't help. We couldn't get there quick enough. The unmanned technology allows a surveillance airplane to sit over that space, and the minute anything moves, image, make a decision, is it friend, foe, or whatever, the controller back in wherever he or she is makes a decision, yes, that's a Scud launcher, and we're going to take it under fire either with the unmanned or we're going to send a manned aircraft in. We know where it is. It enhances our warfighting capability. And in this particular instance, what Scott and I are talking about tonight with the X-47, we are effectively enabling the carrier to be able to stand off twice the distance that we can with the manned airplanes we have today because it can go farther. Then we can keep it in the air via in-flight refueling, which we are going to test this year. And we have an airplane now that can stay in the air as much, we postulate, as 50 hours and provide innumerable areas of surveillance for the battle group commander, or if in a conflict, surveillance over land where we might not want to send a manned aircraft, and or deliver ordnance if we have to, which we couldn't otherwise do. We are confronted today with an enemy in the Western Pacific that has a missile system that outranges the striking power of our aircraft carriers, almost double. We have a 600 nautical mile jet on our aircraft carriers, and that missile, that system is capable of 1,000 nautical miles and targeting our aircraft carriers. So how do we combat that? The answer is you fly over it or find a way that you can have a longer dwell. And so the origin of this system was to be able, the Navy, to keep its carriers back, fly over, and when the threat allows, then you can flow your carriers in. Now, please don't misunderstand me that we are planning this thing for war against China. I'm not even going there. But there is a certain deterrent effect with weapon systems that we build in the military, and we want to give our military the best possible capability. And our goal is to give the United States Navy and its aircraft carriers the best possible capability.
I'm glad you clarified that, Admiral. Thank you.
Well, I'd certainly hate to be misquoted, because that's certainly not something that we are even thinking about. But our military has to plan for every eventuality, and this is part of that planning for the United States Navy. Our United States Air Force is doing the same, as is our Marine Corps, as is our Army. And we are a part of the Navy effort.
What, gentlemen, what do UAVs cost, and what's been the reaction of the military to them?
Hard question to answer, because what does a UAV cost? It's like, what does an airplane cost? A Raven costs, about a handheld little rubber band, just shoot them. Marine Corps has them, Army has them. I think they're probably, $20,000. A system like that you saw, the X-47, there's no difference between that and a combat jet. The savings of taking out the ejection seat isn't all that much in the big scheme of things. But it doesn't have the ECS system, the environmental control system, or an ejection seat. But it has everything else, every sensor, every computer, every comm system that a modern combat airplane costs. So the cost savings is not in the airplane itself. The cost savings is in what it takes to train to do that, and what we cost with airplanes and with men and personnel to go train to do that mission. I think to keep 15 Hornets
Forward deployed,
15 F-18 Hornets forward deployed on the pointy end of the spear, out deployed with the carrier. It takes 100 Hornets bought. You have to train, you have to have one squadron going out, one coming back, one deployed, one in training, one in workup. These kinds of systems, we talked about another dinner story. My table is sworn to silence. You don't have to train. If you're in a box, if you're in the control system, how would you know if you're flying a real airplane or you're training on an emulation? You wouldn't know. So the savings is in the O&S cost, the operational and service cost, the training reserve air groups you have to have, the number of airplanes you have to buy, the amount you wear out the airplanes by training with them. That's where the savings is. Per airplane cost is always going to be comparable, Bill.
A little more on that. Our company builds the B-2 bomber, and 30 years ago, when the bomber was conceived, the number was going to be, I don't know, 100, 120.
Excuse me, Tim, B-2 is a stealth bomber?
Yes, it's the stealth bomber. The number was going to be 100 airplanes. And the developmental cost of that particular system was humongous. I couldn't even guess at how many $billion the development of this first-of-a-kind stealth aircraft cost. But in military aircraft, we amortize the unit costs of those airplanes over the entire buy, such that the R&D, the research and development dollars that are spent, the sunk costs, get wrapped in over, in the case of the F-18 Hornet, over 3,000 aircraft, so that the unit cost comes down considerably than if you were only going to buy 100 of them. But we're not going to build quite as many of these particular systems for the very reason Scott just mentioned. We don't need to build as many as we would a manned aircraft because of the training requirements and everything else that goes on with it. So the R&D dollar can either be wrapped into a smaller number, making the cost higher, or like with fighter airplanes and most airplanes today, you take the R&D cost, because that's the cost of doing business, and then take the unit cost as it rolls off the assembly line. And it is going to be very comparable to what the F-35 is going to be, because it has got all the instrumentation, all the equipments, all the sensors that the F-35 can. Only it can fly twice as long, twice as far, twice as long, and so on and so forth. There was a fairly well-known industry spokesman that said several years ago, he says, well, UAVs are the things of the future because they're cheaper and everything. Not so. They are every bit as complex as a manned aircraft, less an ejection seat and an environmental control system, and that makes them the same. We just won't build as many. And to give you a unit cost without being able to do some of the projections, we're never able to nail that down.
Gotcha. That's very, very clear, very good explanation. What are the primary military uses of UAVs?
Oh, it's the same as would be for any manned system. You have surveillance UAVs. You have ones that can sit and stare at a point. And to Tim's earlier point, it's, what's the advantage of unmanned? Well, one of the big advantages is persistence. The thing doesn't get tired. If you can refuel something, the next thing it runs out is probably oil, but if you can get it, oil and gas, it's not going to get tired, and it can do missions that require staring at a point for long, long periods of time. But it's not just the military uses, Bill, it's because I think those are, there's a multitude of those. I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of what are the civilian uses of UAVs. Jeff Bezos coming out and saying he's going to deliver Amazon.com to your doorway with a quadcopter, as long as the dog's not in the way or something. That's a really, it's easy for people to, like myself, to go, gee, Jeff, you're thinking big thoughts again. That's a really big thought. That's a really important goal. Can these things do that? Not just can they fly, but can they be remote doing lots of things? To one of our earlier chart decks that we have shows that originally all elevators had operators. Does anybody get in an elevator and not just push the button, or they wait for an operator to come? All trams that had operators. All that's become, nondescript, easy. And we are at the beginning of unmanned things doing that kind of work as just a matter of course. And I'm not smart enough to know what all those uses are. I'm hoping that being at a college, some of the students in here will be deciding what those things are.
Inevitably, the question of personal rights and liberty and privacy will come up. And admittedly, in the area that we work, it's not something that is a consideration. We're strictly with military. But I'd like to tell you about how serious the military takes imaging the citizenry of this country. It happened in 2005. We had some very serious fires in Southern California. And there were so many that those that were in charge of fighting the fires could not keep track of them, couldn't find them, couldn't keep track of them, didn't know which ones. And we have a high flyer that flies at 60,000 feet, not the one you just saw, but another one with great big long wings, flies at 60,000 feet, can image all of Southern California in a matter of seconds, and could have brought that picture right down. But because the military is prohibited from flying over our country, taking pictures of our citizenry, we couldn't fly that airplane until the governor called the president and asked for permission, and the president had to allow that to happen. I offer that just because our military pays a lot of attention to the rules of the game, and our nation is well served by people that, even in the midst of a problem like that, said, until we get permission, and it had to go that high. I know that's kind of off point, but inevitably that question is going to come up, and I can't address the sheriffs and the state agencies that fly UAVs at this point.
Well, and they do. The police use of these things is growing, and not, they have some that are flyers, but they also will toss a UAV through a window, got little tank tracks on it, pops up a camera, takes a look around, and they have a display of that. We talk to those guys because they want certain kinds of autonomy. They want it to be a certain amount of not just usefulness, but reliability. We try to help with that. Try to make them work together. They would not trade those in anymore. They wouldn't do it. They say that saves lives. It saves them going in with busting in with the SWAT team and going and looking at things they don't know. So again, there's more uses than we can think of in the few of us sitting here trying to think about it. There's new uses being thought of every day of that stuff.
And I would be remiss if I didn't tell everyone that next Tuesday night at 7:30 we'll be discussing non-military uses of UAVs and drones, and would encourage you to come back for the second part of the series. Pardon?
I probably should be in the audience.
Yeah, we'd love to have both of you back. It would be our honor to host you. We're going to open up for your questions and answers in just a moment. I have one final question that I wanted to pose tonight, and it's really kind of gets at the crux of the issue on UAVs and drones. And gentlemen, I know neither of you are at the policy level. Neither of you are deciding how drones are used and how they're utilized. You're producing the product. Those decisions are being made at the highest levels of our government. But I still want to ask the question about the ethics of UAVs and drones. We're using them on the battlefield. We're using them to track down Al-Qaeda. They've been responsible in some cases for civilian deaths. There's even been discussion of using them against U.S. civilians overseas who are believed to be Al-Qaeda. What are some of the political and ethical considerations in using UAVs and drones?
Well, we even had practice with this. And
I have an opinion. They're like, everybody has one. It's hard for me to distinguish between sitting in an F-16 and pulling the trigger. You got a set of data that says you're allowed to launch. You got a set of rules you're following. And I'm just talking about military use and the permission and the firing of lethal force. Whether you've got a rifle in your hand, whether you're pulling the trigger based on what you see, if you've got a remote trigger based on a camera view, I think what we're trying to get to is to take advantage of the unmanned persistence and the way it is away from the fight. It keeps our people away from the fight doesn't put them in danger, but they're in the fight with data. It's hard for me to distinguish how remote the trigger is. If you're 1 foot away from the trigger or you're 5,000 miles from a trigger, you have to be told what the rules are and be told to pull that trigger. Drones is a convenient stovepipe to classify a set of weapons, when in fact they're just another weapon. They're just another tool. My get out of jail free card or what I tell myself is, because I have my own political bent, we are tasked with delivering the best system we can. Someone that we elect, someone we put in charge, makes a decision whether or not to use that or not. And I can't imagine trying to make something less capable. You know, it's like making a bullet that doesn't quite go straight because we feel, we don't really want to hurt anybody. There's something there that it's hard for me to get around. You know, this is a remote system. That's all.
Today, the military is blessed with global positioning system guided weapons. They don't miss. And whether it's a pilot sitting overhead that happens to be there when the intelligence decides that's where we need to put a weapon, or whether it's an unmanned system and the intelligence system decides it's time to put a weapon there, to me is almost the same thing. If we could take the Predator out of the picture and put an F-16 with a pilot and a GPS weapon, would the same question be asked? The only reason the Predator's there is because it can stay there for 10, 11, 12, 13 hours, and the F-16 can only stay there for an hour and a half, has to go get gas and come back. That's a dilemma that I have, because in a sense, that's the way all our weapons are being delivered today. There just happens to be a pilot on site, but a human has to make the decision whether we're going to shoot or not, and he or she is operating off the best information that he or she has in the cockpit or what's being flowed to him from other sources. The same way the remote control operator on the drone in Nevada, or in the case of this airplane that you saw, will ultimately, when there is an officer monitoring that progress, he or she makes the decision whether to release the weapon. We will never, ever abdicate that responsibility. Now, in air-to-air combat, I postulate we can allow the machine to make the decision to fire because the pilot in a manned airplane has the very same information to make that same decision. It's all electronic today. We do not have a visual requirement to identify the enemy, only under certain rules of engagement. We have what's called beyond visual range, BVR criteria, and the avionics, the electronics, tell the aviator in the cockpit that's a foe. And if it meets all these criteria, and the computer can reach that conclusion much quicker than the pilot can, if all those criteria are met, you're cleared to fire. There should be no difference with an unmanned in air-to-air combat. That is a tactic, a strategy that is coming to the fore finally in our services. We've been yakking about that for about 5 or 6 years. Oh no, we can't do it otherwise. And then the director of naval aviation 2 weeks ago said, I can see these things out here armed with a bunch of weapons defending the manned airplanes because it's all electronics that we are shooting on today. A different question, I know, and strictly a warfare question, but it is related.
Well, I think the only question we can actually comment on with any kind of authority is what is the technology that's required to make that decision? You know, how well are you providing a shooter that technology, that information remotely? You know, that's something we're working on. But everything currently that a pilot sees in a cockpit, you can see from a remote cockpit. The part that we can comment on is the technology of it, the morality of it, or the usability of it. I think is much more in the other crossing vein of policy. I know it is the Dole Policy Institute.
Oh. All right, let's open up for your questions.
I can go over the engineering, degree, and we can talk over there.
Yeah, let's open it up for Q&A. If you got a question, raise your hand. You got to get the attention of either Quinn or Ann Renee, and you ask a question. Okay? No statements.
Thank you.
It is a college.
Just a question on command and control. If these unmanned vehicles are being controlled by computer, are we relying on satellite to provide that information to the computers? And if so, does that upstream then cause us concerns about security of satellites and the hacking stuff that could come along with all that for command and control purposes?
Good question. I mean, yes. The answer is simple. if you have to get the one link where the man is better than the unmanned, in particular in shooting, is he's already pre-briefed on what's allowed, what's not allowed. You know, he doesn't have to call home. The machine will have to call home unless it's got a very specific program to do something very specific. And those links, the command and control link, the data links, all are at risk. They are a way to stop the use of these. Our challenge is to not only make the satellite coverage better or more secure, but also to come up with ways where a fleet of the ones you saw, the X-47s, if it loses satellite link, they shoot all the satellites down. Some bad guy in the UK shoots all the satellites down. They become their own network. They start talking to each other by line of sight links all the way back to a command and control center, or CAOC.
Line of sight.
Line of sight. So when you're in the air, you've got line of sight to another one, line of sight to another one, to another one. That is the command and control, and having positive command and control all the time is one of the biggest challenges in front of us. Because our enemies know that's a weak point.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Yes, clearly the problem of proximity in relationship to violence and warfare is a minor point. From human history, the rock to the stick to the gun to the hellfire is increasing distance from the target of violence. The real issue here is that we might be right on the verge of something like a Skynet. When you combine what just came out about the NSA on the intercept of the NSA's role in the secret US assassination program, and combine that with the technology that you all are involved in creating, you have the possibility of taking all human elements out of it. And so my question is, even with the human elements involved, we've already seen U.S. citizens, a minor, Abdul Rahman Alaki, murdered. It's clear in the Constitution that treason must be defined as waging war on the United States of America. So even if you wage war, even if this man and his son were accused of waging war, they must have a trial and not be assassinated from afar. So with your knowledge and participation in this, you have an ethical stand that you need to make, because you know that you're giving your technology to an organization, the U.S. government, that has murdered a U.S. citizen. So
what's your question, sir?
What are we going to do in terms of this precipice that we stand on, in terms of the evisceration of our rule of law?
Elect different leaders. Good answer. Elect different leaders. I mean, it is that the ability to kill someone anywhere in the world exists, whether it's remote piloted vehicles, whether it's B-2 bombers, whether it's a 45 automatic. The decision to employ those, I think, is what you're questioning, and whether that's morally or legally ethical. And I'll tell you, I wouldn't disagree. That is a question that has to be asked. Whether we did it with an F-16, and I just use that as a manned vehicle, or did it with a drone, I still see the same moral, ethical issue.
Okay, we have a question on the side over here.
Thank you for taking my question. On the heels of the Skynet reference, I have a more autobiographical question for each of you. Is there fiction or film that has kind of influenced the vision of the work that you do, or the development of the technology that you do? So really asking questions about the ways we imagined this maybe 30 years ago, and how that's affected the way it's come to fruition.
It's a very interesting question.
Can I say Top Gun?
Sure.
Your question was, is there a film that, or a Hollywood depiction of, that influences what we do? or what we think?
Film or fiction.
Film or fiction?
Not necessarily film, could be literature.
Okay. I'll start with and try to answer your question, because I think I love science fiction like I'd read a fiction, then a nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction. And I think what you really need to know, or you need to, it sounds a little bit pedantic, I guess, but what you really need to understand is the whole Skynet thing. We are so far from that. I mean, having done the programming of some of these computers, oh my God, we are very, very, we are MS-DOS, C:// compared to, your Apple iPad, and maybe even further than that. Maybe it's just rocks. I will say that some of the fiction you see and some of the literature you see about the future state, it's compelling without bending to its influencing. It certainly is compelling, and some of the things that come up is compelling. And I'll bet you that the Terminator reference and the Terminator movies have influenced a lot of people to kind of have second thoughts about this technology, just because that kind of future is kind of nasty. So, good question though. I don't really have a good literature I can think of. 1984 maybe, a little Orwell.
Okay. Have another question back here?
Yes, I have a question. Do you believe that other countries will model the United States' use of drones, and if so, what the implications are of the proliferation of drones?
Good question.
That's a very good question, and just as with all modern warfare, we have been fortunate enough to lead in the development with virtually every weapon system across the spectrum. We know that there are efforts to chase us, and certainly they will lag by 10 to 20 years. I couldn't even guesstimate how much it could be, but it's part of our commitment to the military to keep it as ahead of the game as possible, knowing full well that we're being chased, just like with every other weapon system that's evolved over the years.
Yeah, there's a very simple answer is yes, and I'll give you something funny that was told me by Admiral Cunningham over at Whale Island when we were over there. We showed him, he's the 3-star?
Two-star.
Royal Navy 2-star. And Royal Navy, I mean, obviously the Royal Navy and the United States Navy are very close. We do everything together. We're very close with the UK. And he watched the brief on the X-47 and the UCAS and that aboard carriers, and he went, if we had a few more of those, we could take the colonies back. So I told him I'm not sure you'd want them, but
Okay, we have a question right here.
Some years ago, a Navy surveillance plane was intercepted, I believe, off the coast of China and forced to land, and the crew were held for a period of time. Would that type of mission now be flown by an unmanned aircraft and not a manned aircraft?
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you asked that question. It crossed my mind talking about it earlier. I'm quite familiar with it. And the circumstances were we have an electronic eavesdropping airplane called the EP-3. It had 12, 14 people in it, and they were flying along the coast of China and Hainan Island. They were intercepted, and they were forced to land the airplane at Hainan. They destroyed as much of the equipment as they possibly could, but we gave away huge amount of intelligence information to the Chinese with that airplane. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Navy began a program to replace it. The airframe is old, it's getting old, and they were going to duplicate it with probably a 737 type aircraft. And Scott and I have had a lot of involvement with the leadership of the Navy. And we were, I guess, feeling our oats one day, and I said to the CNO, we really would like for you to think about using the Global Hawk, the one I was talking about, the 60,000 foot, instrumenting the Global Hawk, which Navy is about to buy, or is buying, instrumenting the Global Hawk to have most of that capability and then data link it down to a land base rather than put people in harm's way. You'll get triple the amount of flight time. It'll fly for 30 hours as opposed to 9 or 10 hours. You don't have to have 14 people in an airplane or hazard and all this other stuff. And at the same time, CNO, here comes the X-47, and if you need a somewhat covert capability over an area where you couldn't send the Global Hawk because you would see it, and with an X-47 with the appropriate low observability, you can go get that information, recover it, bring it back, and data link it down. The replacement aircraft for the EP-3 was canceled within the year. Now, we don't know whether we had anything to do about it, but announced in the press this week was the fact that the new Global Hawk system for the Navy, the Triton, will have many of the sensors that performed that type mission. It was exactly the thought that crossed my mind that day. And we will never, ever have to divert one of our UAVs to Hainan again.
That's
and
exactly,
give up that technology.
That's exactly the kind of advantage a UAV can give you. Exactly.
Okay. We have a question back here.
Yeah, you were talking earlier of a jet that when the pilots got out of the plane, you know, they were complaining, oh, my neck hurts, my back hurts. On these UAVs that are designed similarly to those sort of jets, do you see a noticeable increase in performance, like they can turn quicker, things like that?
Sure. I mean, if you design it to do that, the all modern jets, real jets, the F-22, F-35, F-22 in particular is computer limited to 9 Gs. It's an air-to-air fighter. You know, 9 Gs turns as hard as it can. All I'd have to do is design the criteria for that jet to be whatever you want it to be. It can turn inside itself. Missiles, on the other hand, you know, air-to-air missile turn 30 Gs routinely. You know, they'll spin on their axis. So the next big thing that you all will be working on, your engineering staff here and throughout the country, will be things like how do you design an air-to-air unmanned system? How does that work? How does it sense itself? What does it need? What does its design criteria have to be? Is it better to have a bunch of sensors aboard, or is it better to have it turn quicker? We don't know the answers to those yet.
There's more that goes with it also. The harder it turns, the more structure it's got to have. So it's going to be heavier. Do you really need to do that? The fighter pilots that are somewhat resistant to using our airplane as an interceptor only envision the close in, the approach to merge, then the turn to gain advantage to shoot. But I maintain that given the sensor capability we have today, most of them will never ever even see an enemy other than if they don't shoot, because the systems will allow the system to shoot beyond visual range, and you'll never see. There will be, perhaps in my mind, no need to design in that capability in an unmanned system. It's a constant question we get, and it's a good one, but I just don't see it.
The same question could be said of these Global Hawks fly at 60,000 feet. Well, to get a manned airplane to fly at 60,000 feet, 65,000 feet, you got to have special pressure suits, you got to have different cabins, you got to have all kinds of things. We just don't require all that. It makes the design issue a lot easier.
Okay, we have a question back here.
One of the issues that I think is hard for civilians to understand is how dangerous military operations are just to the military, performing them, training, accidents, friendly fire. Obviously, we talk about collateral damage. It seems like, I mean, from your own experiences, this technology is in a safety feature compared to, for instance, the stories that might come out of World War II, training accidents, friendly fire, bombing, you know, I mean.
You're absolutely right. The majority of the accidents that occur in military aviation today, Army helicopters, Navy fighters, Air Force fighters, are human error. When you take that out, the accident rate will come down considerably, and we have the data to factor in. One point I wanted to make, and I'm going to use some math that's a little bit over even my head, I think, sometimes, but the reliability of this system has to be such that you design it to 1 times 10 to the minus 5th probability of a malfunction. So to do that, you test the computer system, you check all the systems in it, and it turns out the weakest link in the entire system is the engine itself. And we know what kind of reliability we got out of jet engines today, but that is, by definition, the lowest common denominator in these airplanes that we are making today. The weakest link is the engine itself.
Yeah, the engine is a failure rate of 1 times 10 to the minus 4th. But, and, you know, for your future thought experiment, those data are developed for failure modes in engines on airplanes that start, fly, stop. Start, fly, stop. The data of an engine in flight is much more reliable. And once you get a jet engine spinning, eating dead dinosaurs and making a whole bunch of noise and smoke, she stays running. They are very, very reliable. When you let them sit for a long time, they become erratic. So, to Tim's point, we have to design to failure modes, failure, detect, and accommodate. We have to make software that can detect a failure and accommodate a failure, and then reconfigure itself and either keep going or say, I got to come home. I got a radio that's down. I got to come home. When you design it that way, you also have to test it that way, and you have to test it on a, test it on a bench. To your point of, is it safer training? Is it safer getting them flying? It absolutely is. There's data behind that. I don't have to guess at it. I don't have to have an opinion about it. There's data on that. And it also takes all those training sorties away. If you got this capability that you saw on the screen, I don't have to go train pilots to do that mission, which takes that entire cost and risk away. So, excellent question.
Okay, we have a question right here. There are plenty more hands up, so just keep holding them up. Get somebody's attention. And Renee, I got a bunch of people up here. Somebody better go find that wine. Go right there.
Thank you, gentlemen. This has been an extremely interesting program. The X-47 is a wonderful piece of equipment, and without exposing us to any dire consequences, could you talk about what might be brewing 3 years down the road?
3?
That's an excellent question. Next question. There is obviously everything you can think of. Not only expanding what's going on here at X-47 with the operational version, the Air Force has their vision of what these things can do. As we talked about at the table at dinner, we are just in the crawl stage here of trying to figure out how these things work and what they do. And to the earlier morality question, I mean, we have to work our way through that as people. It's really going to be hard.
For the immediate future, if we had it our way, sir, we would continue development on these two airplanes that we have, develop the software to be able to simulate intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance type work, weapons delivery, in-flight refueling, and provide the Navy with all the information it needs to make an informed decision, where does it want to go with the competition. That is optimally what we do, and 3 years is probably a pretty good window. We'd like to continue that.
Okay, we have a question back here. Everybody be patient. We still have more time for questions.
Okay, since our drones become more advanced, our UAVs become more advanced, do we still want to train pilots to do these kind of missions to a certain degree in case something happened to our UAVs? Suddenly all of our cyber network got hacked and all the information got leaked to the Chinese or the Russians, that prevents us from doing anything with UAVs, such as everybody shuts down our satellite like you said before, or whatever consequence. Would you still have that level of contingency to complement the UAVs?
Yes, the question's pretty simple. The answer is yes. We're not talking about pulling a snap and saying, okay, we're all unmanned now. Everybody stop flying. We're done. But like props to jets, you know, I think this is another personal opinion, this wave is coming. And I want to, you know, before you go to sleep tonight, think about airliners. Ever heard the radio traffic for an airline pilot? I mean, it's pretty boring. It is a pretty boring job. It is interspersed with potentially minutes of terror. You know, ask Sully, I guess, about that. But it also is that mission lends itself very well to an unmanned vehicle. I mean, an unmanned airplane, getting on board, doing a known route that has been pre-planned for weeks. It has known sets of failure modes in the airplane. It's a very reliable airplane. But would we do that? I mean, would we get on that airplane? Would we go do that? Now, would you do it if it was $100 round trip to London? So I leave you with think about stuff like that.
But you could ship all your FedEx packages without a pilot in the front. You're not hazarding any humans that way. I have a little different answer to your question. I'm pretty proud of my Navy wings, and I have not gone over to the dark side. I think manned aviation will be around for quite some time because there will always be missions that a human can do better because he or she can think, and a computer can't do that. You have to program the computer to do that. There will be shorter duration missions. There will be ones that require much more flexibility than you need in a UAV, and so I think we will continue on with the training.
I agree.
One of the principal issues, and Scott talked about it, but I'm going to go a little farther. We're trying to convince the Navy of the cost avoidance or savings that go with these systems, and we have never ever factored in what we call the life cycle cost of a system. We've never factored in the life cycle cost of a fighter, all the training that goes into all the aviators that fly that training all its life. We just take it for granted. We just maintain a robust training command for the Navy and the Air Force and the Army, and yet we never figure in what does that add to the cost of that airplane over its lifetime. I'm telling you, we're just about to take all that out, and we're going to try to force them to focus in on what's the true life cycle cost of your manned airplane versus your unmanned airplane. Now, that's not the deciding factor that whether you're going to build them or not, but I think that our nation will decide that we have to continue with a manned complement that can do some of the things. There'll be some overlap, but there will always be some that it just doesn't make any sense using the UAV for.
Okay, we've got a gentleman who's been very, I think my microphone just fell apart, guys.
You can have mine.
Sorry about that. We have a gentleman who's been extremely persistent about holding his hand up here on the second row. So, sir, ask your question.
And nice T-shirt, by the way.
Thanks.
F-16 Fighting Falcon.
I would like to ask about how you were saying about like the Global Hawk was flying about 60,000 feet, and I've heard of a magazine that in 2018 an FB-22 Strike Raptor would be introduced by flying at the same height of service ceiling.
So a service ceiling of the Raptor, the F-22?
Yeah. Or a different one.
A version of the F-22?
Yeah.
They can get there.
But without the back fins on the back.
They take the tails off? Mm-hmm. That's Lockheed's latest drawing you saw in a secret room somewhere? Good
Sir,
man.
I'm sorry, we can't give away classified information tonight, so you'll have to be quiet for the rest of the evening.
You and me are going to talk later. I work for Northrop now.
Well, and if I may, since that got that answer, one of our competitors announced one day, well, we can unman our F-35, and it could fly as long as the X-47 or the UCAS could, and to which my friend with a little wit said, oh, you mean you really don't have to build an airplane with pilots in it anymore? And they stopped that immediately.
So you mean the best F-35 is an unmanned F-35? That stopped it. But you're exactly right. An F-22 and a derivative of F-22 can go to 60,000 feet. It's just a Global Hawk doesn't care how cold it is or that the air is really thin because there's nobody in it. The pilot in it, in an F-22, cares.
Okay, who's got a question? Anybody got another question here? Okay,
no more questions.
There we go.
A little different line of question. Students these days graduating from this university and the other universities, are they coming out well prepared to jump right into these programs so that we have an ongoing group to be able to continue developing?
Well,
if that's a question you can answer.
The answer is a nice, clean, clear yes. I think that, again, we talked about it at dinner a little bit. We have an intern program at Northrop, which I encourage you to apply for if you're a senior or maybe even a junior. And the ideas we get out of the next generation that is used to having a computer interface and is used to one click makes it happen. They're used to having it simple. And they're not used to struggling with a computer, they're used to using a computer. From the guy who started my first computer job, I had a stack of cards to put through, you know, a VAX 11780. And, you know, I never cease to be impressed by the new graduates we get and the interns we get, that they think through, why is this so hard to use? Why is this display? Well, one of the questions we got was a great one. There's a readout of the airplane's attitude on the screen of a fire scout. Fire scouts, you know, they don't fly them, they tell them where to go. But there's a readout of what a pilot would have of what your attitude is at. One of our interns goes, why do we have that? That's an excellent question.
Because aviators like me wanted to have something to look at.
Because aviators want something to look at that looks familiar to them. But the guy coming in from a major college, which shall remain nameless, that's near here. So why do we have that? Well, at least make it small so you don't have to look at it so much. Good point. So I'll say it again. I never cease to be amazed at some of the ideas are not so good. But some of the ones, particularly with a graphic user interface, and the new one is, why can't we do swipe commands and the same things you do with your Apple? Why can't we do those? Why can't we have a pad that does that instead of a keyboard and a mouse like Tim and I are so used to? Why can't we just have something that's more user-friendly? And we actually have funded students to go do those things and tell us what you think you need. We fund several schools around the country to go think about those kinds of ideas.
Glad you didn't mention that other university, Scott, or we might have to have our Jayhawks beat up on your Aztecs in the big dance. We have a question here.
In terms of the border, would the Border Patrol, if they're not using a drone now, would that be an advantage to them? And what about the insertion if we were to go into Mexico with a drone? Would that violate any of the whatever?
Yeah, you can't fly into other international space without. But any task that requires staring at lots of ground for an innumerable amount of time, a computer's really good at doing that. It doesn't get tired. We have to sort through that the FAA does not allow real UAVs to fly in our airspace, you know, unless you want to fly below 500 feet and have less than 20 pounds or there's some number. Don't quote me, but it's something like that. We have suggested many times that a fire scout, which, you know, if it gets in trouble, it just lands. You know, just lands wherever it is, instead of having something that would actually have some energy if something went wrong. But a fire scout could surveil back and forth across the entire border. You could have them chainsawing, doing that operation all the time. And it isn't just border security. It's anything that requires, you know, persistent staring, looking for activity, that kind of thing. So the answer is a quick yes. Whether we can talk ourselves into them flying over Arizona or Texas or California, I'm not so sure.
Okay, we're going to take one more question if we have it. Actually, we'll take two. Ann Renee, I'll take yours, and Sir, I'll get yours right here, and that'll be it.
Oh, wow. Okay, good. All right. My question does have a little bit to do with the strategic aspect of drones, but I hope that you can still answer it. So you mentioned drones, like hypothetically being able to be used against China and like used to detect Scud missile launchers, basically UAVs being able to be used in areas that are potentially too dangerous for humans. Given that
Hypothetically,
yeah. Given that UAVs give us the capability to do potentially dangerous missions without putting humans at risk, do you see this lowering the threshold for when the military might consider using force?
Well, or do you put doubt in the enemy's mind, or you give them some pause that you might use something like that? Is it a better deterrent effect? You have to think through that part of the argument also. Your turn.
Military doesn't make the decision. Civilian leadership makes the decision for the military. So the question belongs to them, but I do like to think of it in terms of a deterrent effect. Okay, your stick is that long, and mine is that long. Do you want to commit aggression? It's as simple as that in my mind. And I don't mean to minimize the importance of the question. Please don't misunderstand me, but we want to be able to hold them at risk as opposed to allow ourselves to be at risk. That's our thesis.
Okay, we have time for one last question right here, sir.
Okay. A lot of what you're developing, it sounds like, is the ability to have positive control of military systems at a distance. It's not how to fly a plane. You all know how to do that. That same technology you're developing, is it being looked at for other systems like IED sweepers, naval minesweepers? And what really jumps to my mind is submarines.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. There's lots of work going on with undersea UUVs. And I'm going to tell a quick sea story because I'm Navy, and anti-submarine warfare has always been a big deal for us. We're not as great sometimes as we think we are. His father was a submariner, and I think he saw the carrier through the periscope before we ever saw him. And
he told that story to every aviator he ever met.
Yeah. But you put a Global Hawk, or the Triton in the Navy parlance, you put them up there at 60,000 feet, just not radiating. Nobody knows it's there. It's just sitting there listening with all these sensors. Every submarine comes up approximately every 24 hours and makes a sweep, either to get message traffic or to find out what's around, and then it goes back down. If you have one airplane up there just listening, it will hear or see or recognize that particular sweep. If you have two up, you can triangulate, and then you can prosecute. I think it is a huge leap forward for anti-submarine warfare. Now to a further problem that he and I have worked on, and we got lots of deaf ears out there on this one. But you got an airplane that sits at 60,000 feet, almost above all the atmospherics. In ballistic missile defense, the key is seeing the missile coming at you so that you can target and shoot, whether it's from a ship or from land-based. And it's something we work on all the time, ballistic missile defense, BMD. We've spent a phenomenal amount of money, and we really haven't solved the problem. But if we get an air breather like a Global Hawk or a Triton at 60,000 feet with the sensor that can see the plume as it exits the atmosphere, because the plume will exist in that missile through the atmosphere. Sometimes you can't see through down, but as it comes through, you get it, and then you give it the means to be able to triangulate on it or to put a radar signature on it to be able to start the tracking. We think this particular system might offer the first means of defense in identifying a ballistic missile, as opposed to what we're saddled with right now. It's like pulling teeth, getting people to think about that particular capability, just adding it on to the existing system itself. And that's the way the thought processes go for all these systems we've talked about tonight. I sat in front of, or stood in front of an audience one day, a Navy audience. There was a lieutenant commander sat right there, and that guy sat there the whole time, just like that, until we got about 3/4 of the way through the brief. And then he said, well, could you do this? Could you do that? And it was one of those, yes, 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 if you build the capability into the airframe, big enough, strong enough, capability-wise, enough to be able to do those type of things. And people are starting to get it. It's just, I'm marketing, sorry about that.
Comes naturally. To your point about IEDs also, we were asked for help by the Army to go identify IEDs and go try and get rid of them along a road. They were actually soldiers in Humvees with flailing chains to try and explode stuff. And we said, geez, let me just drive the Humvee for you, with my little computer. Done. And we today take care of some of that stuff, and it has saved lives. That's not, you know, a big brag about it. It just, those kinds of missions, anything you can think of like that, that a man shouldn't be there, let's fix that. Let's take him out of that loop. I'll go blow my computer up. I'll build another one.
It's almost 9 and he wants a beer, but I'm going to give you one more on that one.
2 beers.
Somebody has to plant the IED. If you can put eyes on that spot for a given period of time, like a week, sooner or later, the Earth is going to be disturbed. And if you have a sensor that can image, and then sooner or later somebody sees there's something happened down there, we don't know why, but we've got the imagery and it's disturbed, then maybe that was an IED you can go forward with. We just happen to have been doing that in Afghanistan for quite some time.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for the great program tonight.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. You guys are too kind.
Great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Let me remind you all that next Tuesday night we'll reconvene. We'll be talking about lots of other uses of UAVs and drones, agriculture, and all kinds of other areas. It'll be really interesting. So please join us. Thank you for coming out.
Crop dusting.